What if the very reason your life feels out of rhythm isn't because you're doing something wrong, but because you've forgotten who you truly are? Not every woman is ordinary. Some are quietly chosen, deeply guided, and divinely protected, but they don't always recognize the signs. If you've ever felt different, if love has challenged you more than comforted you, if your silence speaks louder than your words, this message is for you. This isn't just motivation, it's a mirror reflecting the 7 unshakable signs that you are a woman favored not by luck, but by a higher purpose. Stay with this to the end, and you'll see why your delays were divine, your detours were protection, and your inner voice was never wrong. There is a kind of woman whose presence brings stillness even before she speaks. Her calm is not the absence of noise. It is the mastery of it. This woman doesn't chase control over life's chaos. She becomes unmoved within it. You may find her standing at a kitchen sink or walking into a boardroom. Yet regardless of the setting, she carries a centeredness that influences the entire space. Her nervous system is not reactive. It is trained. Her breath is not shallow. It is grounded. This isn't by accident. It is the result of self-awareness and disciplined practice. A woman favored by heaven is often one who has cultivated inner stillness in the midst of outer storms. Stillness does not mean passivity. It is not weakness or avoidance. It is the capacity to respond instead of react. Most people live like dominoes. One negative word, one emotional jab, and they fall. But this woman, through pain and persistence, has become like a mountain. Still, present, immovable. Neuroscience calls this emotional regulation, an ability to remain composed in high stress moments by strengthening the prefrontal cortex. But for her, it's deeper than brain chemistry. It's spiritual. She has learned to breathe through heartbreak, to soften into grief, and to pause before speaking venom. Her stillness becomes her sword. She no longer bleeds on those who didn't cut her. There's an old story of a village where people came to a wise woman in times of crisis. They came with anger, betrayal, loss, and she would say nothing at first. She would simply breathe, let the silence teach. Then slowly, after she had settled the emotions within herself, she would speak with clarity, not with heat, but with depth. The villagers began to realize they were not coming for answers. They were coming to borrow her stillness because their own had been lost. This woman, much like many walking among us, did not rise through noise, but through quiet. And that quiet was a sign she was held by something greater. A favored woman does not mirror the chaos around her. She transforms it. In her presence, others begin to feel safe enough to soften. The agitated become calm. The anxious begin to exhale. She becomes the regulator of emotional climate. Not because she's perfect, but because she is practiced. She has faced herself. She has sat with her own pain long enough to stop projecting it on others. She does not fight for power in the room. She becomes the power. And this power is not loud. It is not dominant. It is stable. It is embodied peace. From a psychological view, this type of presence is developed through intentional nervous system healing, breath work, meditative stillness, trauma integration. But beyond techniques, there is a knowing that comes from experience. She has endured nights when no one heard her cry. She has learned that control is an illusion and that surrender is strength. So while the world races and clutches, she lets go and breathes. And that breath becomes her blessing. Women often ask, how do I become more graceful under pressure? How do I not lose myself in the middle of life's storms? The answer isn't in pretending to be strong. It's in training yourself to stay soft, to stay aware. When someone tries to provoke her, she does not meet fire with fire. She meets it with centered awareness. When plans fall apart, she does not spiral. She returns to her breath. When someone walks away, she does not chase. She honors their path and remains rooted in her own. This doesn't mean she feels nothing. It means her emotions do not command her. She feels deeply, but chooses wisely. Stillness is not the goal. Stillness is the evidence. It reveals that the woman has shifted her trust from people and outcomes to something internal, something eternal. This is what makes her favored. She does not ask for approval to be at peace. She is peace. She is the quiet answer in a loud world. And from this stillness arises another quality, compassion without attachment, a sacred ability to love deeply, yet hold lightly. Most people confuse love with ownership. They believe if they give their heart, they must receive permanence in return. But a woman favored by something higher understands love is not possession. Love is presence. And presence must be offered freely, not from fear, not from need, but from fullness. She loves fully, but not foolishly. Her compassion is not enabling. It is discerning. She has learned through pain that giving too much, too soon, too often is not generosity. It is self-abandonment. So now, she gives from a healed heart, not a hollow one. She listens not just to words, but to energy. She doesn't confuse chemistry with character, and she no longer offers her sacredness to those who treat it casually. There was once a woman who spent years trying to prove her love to a man who never chose her completely. She bent, she molded, she sacrificed, believing that if she loved enough, he would see her worth. But in the end, all she had was exhaustion and silence. When she finally walked away, not in bitterness, but in clarity, something shifted. She began to love herself with the same loyalty she had offered him. And slowly, her compassion matured into wisdom. She learned that the right person doesn't require you to shrink to be chosen. True compassion doesn't mean staying where you're not respected. It means honoring yourself enough to walk away when love turns into a negotiation. This kind of strength comes from self-knowledge, from knowing you are whole already, and that you don't have to prove your worth through emotional labor. The woman favored by divine timing no longer gives to be loved. She gives because she is love. In psychology, this reflects a shift from anxious attachment to secure self-bonding. She no longer ties her self-worth to others' responses. She doesn't panic in the absence of affirmation. She knows her love is a gift, not a transaction. Her compassion flows like a river, steady, unforced, cleansing. But when a dam blocks her flow, disrespect, dishonesty, disregard, she doesn't flood the barrier. She changes direction. This woman holds space for others, but not at the cost of herself. If a man she loves is emotionally unavailable, she does not take that as a challenge. She takes it as information. If a friend begins to drain her spirit, she doesn't explain repeatedly. She silently adjusts her distance. If her family projects old wounds onto her, she loves them, but sets clear parameters. Her compassion is not weakness. It is structured. It has roots, and perhaps the most powerful sign of divine favor in her relationships is that she allows others to have their journey. She no longer tries to fix people who don't want healing. She doesn't carry what isn't hers. She can sit with someone's pain without making it her own. Her love is deep, yes, but it is clean. It does not entangle, it empowers. From this place, she becomes rare, because in a world where people either close their hearts for safety or overextend them for approval, she stands in the middle, open but discerning, available but not needy, loving but not losing herself. This kind of woman is not common. She is forged through inner fire, through repeated lessons in self-worth, through heartbreaks that led not to bitterness, but to boundaries, through years of learning the difference between being used and being valued. And now, her presence teaches others how to treat her without needing to say a word. She does not control people. She aligns herself. And from that alignment, the right people stay, the wrong ones fall away, and peace becomes her standard. The quiet truth. A woman who embodies stillness and compassion without attachment is already operating under divine favor. She may not always feel seen by the world, but heaven has been watching all along. There is something unshakably powerful about a woman who treats her daily habits as sacred. Her life doesn't move in bursts of inspiration. It flows from a deep reservoir of intention. While many chase momentary highs and emotional peaks, she understands that the foundation of favor is not built in grand events, but in quiet, consistent alignment. You may not notice her routines at first glance. There is no show, but everything she touches, from how she greets the morning to how she prepares for rest, carries the fingerprint of discipline wrapped in grace. She does not wait for life to feel right. She moves in the rhythm of what she knows to be right. Many women live fragmented lives. They feel scattered, always starting over, constantly resetting. Not because they lack ambition, but because they haven't yet anchored themselves in ritual. The favored woman is different. She sees routine not as restriction, but as reverence. She wakes with awareness, not scrolling. She nourishes her body with mindfulness, not mindless urgency. She speaks to herself with clarity, not condemnation. Her mornings are not rushed declarations of business. They are ceremonies of readiness. Each movement, each breath, each choice is a quiet offering to the future she is already becoming. There is a story of a young woman who once lived in a house filled with noise, external and internal. The television was always on, conversations were laced with comparison, and her mind was cluttered with the voices of others. She could not hear herself. Her days began with chaos and ended in exhaustion. But after a painful breakup, something shifted. One evening, instead of seeking noise to distract her, she sat in silence. It was uncomfortable at first, but eventually she lit a candle, played soft music, and simply began to listen. Over time, that single act became her ritual, and from there her life began to change, not all at once, but deeply and permanently. She started journaling each morning. She began moving her body with care. She learned to prepare nourishing meals not as a chore, but as a form of love. Slowly, she restructured her life from the inside out. That is the power of sacred habit. It's tempting to think that favor just descends like some mysterious grace we have no say in. But more often, it's cultivated, grown in the garden of self-respect and sustained discipline. Discipline is not about control. It's about alignment. A woman who is favored knows that how she lives privately shapes what she attracts publicly. The energy she brings to each day is not random. It's curated. She doesn't just wish for peace. She creates the conditions for it. She doesn't hope to be loved. She becomes love in action, in practice, in intention. From the lens of neuroscience, the brain thrives on repetition. Every repeated action wires new pathways. What this means is simple: your habits are your destiny. Not because they trap you, but because they train you. A woman who rises early to meditate isn't just being spiritual. She's recalibrating her nervous system. A woman who writes out her thoughts each day isn't just journaling. She's creating cognitive space for clarity. A woman who prepares herself with care is telling her mind, I am worthy of attention. I am worth showing up for. This consistency leaks into her relationships. People feel her energy before they understand her habits. She brings a calm predictability that others can trust. She doesn't swing between extremes. She doesn't need to perform to be loved. And because she shows up for herself every day, she no longer tolerates relationships that operate in chaos. If a man offers her love that is inconsistent, distracted, or emotionally immature, she recognizes it, not from judgment, but from inner contrast. She's seen what real devotion looks like. because she gives it to herself. And so anything less feels foreign, not familiar. Imagine a woman who makes her morning cup of tea like it's a sacred rite. Who steps outside to breathe even for 5 minutes before touching her phone. Who speaks gratitude aloud, not because life is perfect, but because she's training her spirit to recognize abundance. Her schedule may look ordinary, but the energy behind it is transformative. Over time, this intentional rhythm does more than improve her day. It reshapes her self-image. She begins to walk with dignity. She makes clear decisions. She no longer rushes to prove herself because she's already been met by herself in stillness. This doesn't mean she never falls off track. It means she knows how to return quickly, gracefully, without shame. When she misses a practice, she doesn't spiral into self-judgment. She gently resets. She knows that discipline without compassion is brutality, and compassion without structure is chaos. She lives in the balance. She has made peace with imperfection, and yet she still expects more from herself because she honors what she carries. In relationships, this kind of woman is rare. She doesn't lose herself in another person because she already belongs to a structure that keeps her rooted. Her sense of identity isn't easily shaken by rejection because her value is reinforced every day through practice. She brings a wholeness that doesn't demand others to complete her. And this is what makes her so attractive, not in appearance, but in presence. There is an ancient principle, as within, so without. It means that what is cultivated in the unseen eventually shapes the seen. A woman who cultivates patience in solitude will attract harmony in partnership. A woman who honors her word to herself will attract those who do the same. A woman who rises each day with quiet strength becomes a lighthouse in a world drowning in distraction. Discipline also speaks when she must say no. When invitations don't align with her values, she doesn't hesitate. When people test her boundaries, she remains firm but kind. Her yes means something because she knows the weight of her time and attention. She's not available for every emotional fire. She's not reactive to every opinion. Her life is not driven by external demand, but by internal design. A man once told a story of meeting such a woman. He said, "I was drawn to her, not because of how she looked, but because of how she lived. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't trying to convince. She had a rhythm to her life that made me want to rise to her level. She was clear, focused, kind. She made me want to be more disciplined just by being in her presence." That is the hidden power of disciplined grace. It raises the standard without a single demand. There's a difference between the woman who performs discipline and the woman who embodies it. Performance is exhausting. It seeks validation. It hides flaws. Embodiment is different. It allows space for failure, but stays committed. It isn't rushed by comparison. It moves from a deep place of knowing, I am becoming who I was meant to be, one aligned step at a time. This woman, though she may appear ordinary to the untrained eye, is deeply favored, not because her life is easy, but because her soul is trained. She's not waiting for someone to come fix her life. She builds it. One breath, one choice, one quiet act of devotion at a time. When she enters a relationship, she doesn't demand perfection, but she does require alignment. She's not moved by charm. She's moved by consistency. She listens not just to words, but to rhythm. Can this man keep pace with her values? Can he honor the sacredness of what she's built? Can he move with intention? Or will he require her to slow down for his chaos? And when she loves from overflow. Her emotional cup isn't empty. Her energy is not scattered. She knows how to give without depletion. Because before anyone else chose her, she chose herself. Daily. And that choice rewired her brain, softened her heart, and strengthened her spirit. Such a woman is not in competition. She's not in a rush. She knows that the universe honors structure, not just sincerity. She knows that prayers without preparation are noise, that longing without action is emptiness. So she doesn't just pray for love. She prepares for it. She doesn't just desire peace. She disciplines herself into it. Her mornings are not about control. They are about alignment. Her evenings are not about escaping. They're about integrating. Her days are not wasted in drama. They are structured for depth, and this structure gives her freedom. The freedom to be fully herself, regardless of who stays or leaves. A man can say he respects you, but if he disregards your time, your boundaries, your growth, then his actions cancel out his words. A friend can call you sister, but if she gossips when you're not in the room or competes with your happiness, then her presence is a threat in disguise. A family member can say they love you, but if they constantly dismiss your healing, then what they offer is not support. It's control. For a woman who lives in alignment, these contradictions are not tolerable. Not because she is arrogant, but because she has worked too hard to become whole. She has tasted what it's like to live with herself in peace. She no longer trades that peace for the illusion of connection. And this, perhaps more than anything, is the sign of deep favor. Not that she is never hurt, but that she refuses to abandon herself in order to be loved. One might ask, how does one become such a woman? It doesn't happen overnight. It begins in small moments. Choosing honesty when lying would be easier. Staying consistent when the path gets hard. Being kind when bitterness is tempting. Holding boundaries when the pressure to people please arises. Apologizing when wrong, not to be seen as good, but to restore integrity. These are quiet choices, invisible to the world, but they build a structure inside that becomes unbreakable. There is an old Eastern proverb, the one who walks in truth walks securely. This security is not in outcomes, it's in identity. She does not fear being exposed because there is nothing false to reveal. She does not fear being misunderstood because her life explains what her words do not. She does not fear being alone because her solitude is honest, not hollow. And it is from this honest solitude that her relationships flourish. She attracts partners, friends, and communities who are not looking for perfection, but for truth. People who are tired of the games, the pretending, the emotional inconsistency. People who crave depth over drama, presence over performance, realness over rush. And when such people meet her, they feel something rare, a steadiness that invites their own honesty to rise. There was a man who once described such a woman. He said, she didn't need to say she was loyal. You could feel it in the way she carried herself. She didn't need to tell me her values. I could see them in how she treated the waitress, how she spoke of her friends, how she honored her own boundaries. She wasn't perfect, but she was whole, and being around her made me want to be more whole too. This is the subtle influence of a woman who lives in quiet integrity. She doesn't push people to change. She invites them through her example. Her consistency becomes a mirror, a reminder, a challenge, and sometimes a filter, because not everyone can walk with someone so clear. Not everyone is ready to stand next to someone who cannot be manipulated, who does not shift to fit, who does not fear being alone. But for those who are ready, her presence is transformative. And yet, this kind of life doesn't come without cost. Integrity will often ask you to stand alone before it surrounds you with those who match you. It will ask you to speak the truth when silence would be safer. It will ask you to walk away from temporary comfort for lasting peace. It will require you to be misunderstood, to be judged, to be mocked. But it will also give you something the world cannot take, inner clarity. That clarity becomes a compass. You no longer chase relationships. You attract resonance. You no longer beg to be understood. You live your truth, and those who are meant to understand will arrive. You no longer tolerate hot and cold energy because you are consistent, and inconsistency becomes intolerable. In the end, her life becomes her message, not in quotes posted online, not in staged moments for applause, but in the way she wakes, the way she listens, the way she chooses, the way she stays true even when no one is watching. She doesn't strive to impress. She strives to remain true, and in that truth, she is deeply, quietly, unshakably favored. She doesn't always have the loudest voice in the room. Often, she speaks last, not because she doubts her perspective, but because she's listening, not just to what's being said, but to what's not. She's reading energy, watching eyes, sensing the weight behind the words. And when she finally speaks, what she says lands with depth because it rises from a place of deep inner knowing. There's something quietly powerful about a woman who moves through life with intuitive alignment. She does not second guess every choice. She does not over-explain her decisions. She trusts the subtle voice within her, an intelligence far deeper than logic and louder than fear when we learn how to listen. In a world that constantly bombards us with noise, opinions, information, expectations, the woman who can hear her intuition is rare. She is not disconnected from reason, but she's not ruled by it either. She knows when something feels off, even when it looks perfect on paper. She can sense when a relationship is laced with subtle manipulation, even if the other person seems kind and attentive. She listens not only to the words someone speaks, but to the tone, the silence, the tension underneath. Her wisdom is felt. It's embodied. She doesn't need proof to walk away. Sometimes her clarity comes before the evidence does. This is not some mystical gift reserved for a few. Intuition is a skill, one that can be cultivated and refined. Biologically, the gut-brain connection, the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, is a real, measurable mechanism. We feel before we think. Our bodies register truth, danger, and resonance long before our minds catch up. The problem is not that we lack intuition. The problem is that we've learned to ignore it. We've been conditioned to doubt ourselves, to seek validation, to defer to logic even when everything inside us says, this isn't right. But a woman favored by divine timing has learned to tune back in, often through pain, often through the costly consequences of ignoring that inner signal. She remembers the moment she said yes, when she knew it should have been no. The moment she stayed when everything in her spirit told her to go. The time she gave someone another chance, even though her soul was whispering, they won't change. And through those heartbreaks, through that regret, she stopped abandoning herself. She stopped silencing her wisdom. She began to reclaim the voice she'd buried under politeness, fear, and the desperate desire to be chosen. Now, when her body tightens in a conversation, she doesn't dismiss it. She pays attention. When she feels drained after an interaction, she doesn't judge herself for being too sensitive. She asks why. When a man comes into her life with all the right words, but his presence feels disjointed, she doesn't override her instinct just because he checks the boxes. She understands that alignment is felt first, not analyzed. And when her intuition and logic don't match, she pauses. She reflects. She doesn't rush clarity. She lets it rise. There's a story of a woman who was engaged to a man who was everything she had prayed for on the surface. He was successful, respectful, generous. Everyone around her celebrated the engagement. But the night after the proposal, she couldn't sleep. Her chest felt tight, her stomach uneasy. She brushed it off as anxiety, stress, maybe even ungratefulness. But the feeling didn't leave. And a week later, while watching him interact with her family, she saw it. the subtle control in his eyes, the way he shut down when she disagreed with him. She realized the version of him she was marrying wasn't the whole truth. She ended the engagement, not because she had proof, but because she had peace in her decision. And months later, it came out that he had been hiding major parts of his life. Her intuition had protected her from what logic could not yet see. This is the quiet gift of inner alignment. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And the more we honor it, the louder and more trustworthy it becomes. A woman aligned with her inner wisdom walks differently. She doesn't question herself obsessively. She doesn't make a dozen phone calls seeking reassurance. She takes time with her decisions, but once she makes them, she stands in them. Her confidence is not arrogance. It is alignment. She has consulted the deepest part of herself, and that consultation matters more to her than the opinions of others. In relationships, this creates a different kind of dynamic. She doesn't chase chemistry. She listens for character. She notices how she feels in someone's presence, light or heavy, seen or managed, inspired or diminished. And when something feels wrong, she doesn't need a dramatic excuse to leave. It doesn't feel aligned. Is reason enough? Her peace is her compass. She doesn't demand certainty. She trusts resonance. People around her may not always understand. They may say she's being too careful, too distant, too cautious, but they don't carry her history. They haven't lived through the consequences of self-betrayal. She has, and that experience has birthed a devotion to her own inner truth, not the reactive emotions of the moment, but the truth that sits beneath the noise. She does not fear solitude, because solitude is where her knowing grows. In stillness, she recalibrates. She hears the voice within again, and this makes her unshakable, not because she has all the answers, but because she trusts herself to find them. A woman who trusts her intuition is not dependent on external approval. She doesn't have to be told what's right. She feels it. And this is what makes her dangerous to those who would rather keep her doubting. In a relationship, she is magnetic, but not easily impressed. She's not swayed by performance. She watches consistency. She trusts patterns more than promises. She pays attention to how she feels around someone. Does she feel small, silenced, or seen? Does her spirit expand or contract in his presence? She doesn't ignore these feelings. They are her guidance. They are her truth. She doesn't date based on potential. She honors what S is. And if a man's energy doesn't match his words, she doesn't negotiate. She disengages. This clarity is born from deep listening, not just to people, but to herself. She carves out time to be with her own thoughts, to journal, to walk in nature, to sit in silence. These are not luxuries, they are necessities. Because without this space, her inner voice is drowned out by the chaos of the world. And when that voice is lost, decisions become messy. Relationships become reactive. Life becomes unrooted. There's a reason why ancient traditions, spiritual, philosophical, and even martial, place such high value on stillness. In stillness, perception sharpens. In silence, wisdom speaks. And the woman who has trained herself to sit with uncertainty, to lean into quiet, to embrace not knowing for a while, she gains something most people never touch: intuitive authority. The kind that can walk away from a seemingly perfect situation and feel no guilt. The kind that can pause when pressured and wait for the inner green light. The kind that doesn't need anyone else to affirm what she already knows inside. This doesn't mean she never questions herself. Doubt still arises, but she doesn't live in doubt. She observes it, explores it, but doesn't let it override her knowing. She welcomes logic, feedback, conversation. But she does not outsource her soul's direction. Her alignment is her responsibility, and it's one she doesn't take lightly. The result is a life that feels whole, relationships that are nourishing, choices that may not always be easy, but always feel right, and a deep, grounded self, trust that can't be shaken by rejection, confusion, or delay. There's a quiet kind of woman who walks away not because she doesn't care, but because she cares too much to betray her peace, who chooses herself not in selfishness, but in sacred self-regard, who says no, not to hurt, but to honor. And every time she does, she aligns more deeply with who she was created to be. Not rushed, not reactive, but rooted, intuitive, clear, and deeply, quietly favored. She knows when to hold on, and she knows when to let go. But what makes her different, what sets her apart in a world that clings to what hurts, is how she releases. She does not let go with anger, resentment, or the need to prove her worth. She lets go with grace. There is no shouting, no spectacle, no dramatic exit. Only the quiet dignity of someone who has made peace with what no longer serves her. This kind of release is not weakness. It is sacred detachment. It is strength so refined, so centered, that it no longer needs to fight to be seen or understood. Letting go does not come easily for most people, especially in love, especially when your heart was sincere. When you've invested time, emotion, and hope into something, it's human to want it to work. You replay memories, rewrite conversations in your mind, cling to the moments that felt real. You look for signs, you pray for change, and sometimes you stay long after your spirit has already begun to walk away. But the woman who is deeply aligned with divine timing has learned the art of releasing what does not align, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for her own peace. There is a woman who once believed that holding on was the same as loving well. She stayed in a relationship that drained her because she thought endurance was a sign of strength. The man she loved gave her just enough affection to keep her hopeful, just enough promises to keep her believing, but never enough consistency to make her feel safe. For years, she carried the weight of fixing, explaining, forgiving. She told herself that love meant sacrifice. But one morning, after another night of silence and confusion, something inside her broke. Not in despair, but in clarity. She realized she had mistaken emotional labor for emotional connection. She wasn't being loved, she was being tested. And from that moment, she began to let go. Not with a storm, but with a soft exhale, a returning to herself. That letting go became the most sacred thing she had ever done. Sacred detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you no longer allow your caring to become your captivity. You recognize that not everything that feels familiar is meant to be kept. That not every person who enters your heart is meant to stay. And most importantly, you realize that loving someone does not obligate you to abandon yourself. The woman favored by grace has come to understand this. She doesn't see endings as failures. She sees them as transitions, signposts that the season has changed. In psychology, the attachment systems in the brain are wired early. They determine how we bond, how we relate, and how we respond to separation. Anxious attachment clings, fearing abandonment. Avoidant attachment detaches prematurely, fearing vulnerability. But secure attachment, true, grounded emotional maturity, knows how to love deeply and still release when love becomes unkind, inconsistent, or unclear. This woman has trained herself towards security. She is no longer driven by the fear of being alone. She is guided by the peace of being aligned. When someone begins to drift, when words no longer match actions, when the energy of the relationship begins to feel heavy rather than healing, she notices. She does not make excuses for poor behavior. She does not manipulate reality to justify staying. She observes, she reflects, and then, if necessary, she departs, not to prove a point, but to protect her peace. She doesn't need closure in the way others do. She doesn't wait for an apology that may never come. She doesn't require the other person to admit they mishandled her heart. Her healing doesn't depend on their accountability. It depends on her awareness. She says, I saw what I needed to see. I felt what I needed to feel. And now I choose to release. That decision is not cold, it's clean. It's the wisdom that comes from knowing that some relationships are assignments, not destinations. There's a story of a woman who walked away from a relationship with no goodbye. The man she loved had been passive, aggressive for years. Never fully present, never fully absent. He gave her crumbs of affection, but withheld consistency. And for a while, she tried to confront it. She communicated, she waited, she hoped, but one day she simply stopped. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she started loving herself more. She left a letter on his table. Not blaming, just stating her truth. This isn't how I want to be loved, she wrote. And I no longer have to convince you of that. Then she walked away, and as she closed the door, she didn't cry. She smiled, because she knew she had honored her own growth. Sacred detachment is not only for romantic relationships. It applies to friendships that become transactional, to family ties that are rooted in guilt instead of genuine connection, to dreams that no longer resonate. It is the ability to release the familiar in order to make space for the aligned, to outgrow environments, expectations, and even versions of yourself that no longer fit who you are becoming. This kind of woman doesn't cling to identity either. She allows herself to evolve. She doesn't trap herself in the labels others gave her. She releases outdated stories about who she should be. She knows that the same discipline she applied to letting go of toxic people must also be used to let go of limiting beliefs. If she once believed she was unworthy, she releases it. If she once feared being alone, she embraces solitude. If she once needed to be understood, she now rests in understanding herself. She has made peace with silence. She has learned to sit in the age of letting go without rushing into distractions. She doesn't numb with noise or chase validation. She allows the pain to wash through her, not to drown her, but to cleanse her. And as the emotions subside, clarity remains. She no longer romanticizes chaos. She doesn't confuse emotional intensity with connection. She recognizes that true love is peace, not confusion. And anything that constantly destabilizes her sense of self is not love, it's a lesson. Letting go doesn't mean she forgets. It means she no longer lets the past define her. She can remember without reliving. She can forgive without re-inviting. She can bless people from afar, wishing them healing, while also knowing that her path must be protected. She has learned the art of loving from a distance, the art of letting people go without making them villains, and the art of returning to herself without guilt. In relationships, this detachment allows her to love more purely because she doesn't need the other person to complete her. She can love them freely. She gives without losing herself. She receives without entitlement. She enjoys the connection, but she doesn't fuse her identity with it. And if the connection ends, she grieves with grace, not with desperation. Her love is not a chain, it's a current, flowing, alive, free. She teaches people how to treat her, not through demands, but through demonstration. When someone begins to cross her boundary, she doesn't escalate, she exits. When someone plays with her emotions, she doesn't argue, she detaches. And when someone refuses to meet her with the same level of presence she offers, she doesn't chase. They simply feel her absence, because her absence is a form of teaching too. There's power in a woman who knows how to walk away, not because she is cold, but because she is clear, not because she doesn't care, but because she has cared enough. And now it's time to care for herself. Her life is not a space for negotiation. Her energy is not a resource to be mined. Her love is not a reward for persistence. It's a response to presence. She walks lightly, not because she's unbothered,